So today we have a 2008 Toyota Highlander. It's got the V6, which I believe is a 3.5, and it's here today because the customer thought it had a serpentine belt tensioner failure or an idler failure, but turns out it's actually the water pump that's failed. I'll try and get in here and move this water pump pulley. I don't know if you can see that moving at all, but the water pump is shot. According to Toyota, you're supposed to remove the engine assembly to get this out of here. There's not a lot of room. It's quite challenging at best, but we're going to tackle it today. I've already removed the top 4 bolts that hold the upper engine brace and the engine cover. I've got the serpentine belt off. I took it off earlier to check all the pulleys. We're going to look at those a little closer once we get in there. But I got it on the hoist. We're going to take the right front wheel off, the inner fender skirt off, and have a look in there. So once you get the wheel off and the inner fender off, you can see up here a little better. Here's the water pump pulley. I don't know how good that's showing up on the camera, but the water pump goes all the way across here and over there. It looks like we're going to have to take this belt tensioner. AC compressor feels smooth. Tensioner feels smooth, but we'll take it off. Okay, let's continue. So remove the 4 bolts that hold the pulley on, because we're going to have to get at some bolts behind the pulley. The pulley won't come out of there, but you can move it off to the side, as you can see, to get at the appropriate bolts behind. And the next we're going to try to remove this tensioner assembly here, because it's over top of it. So the 14 mil headed bolt that holds the tensioner wheel on is left-hand thread. So once you crack it loose, it should come off. Hopefully we can leave the tensioner there. So as I mentioned, the bottom bolt is left-hand thread. That's on the tensioner wheel. The top idler is a normal thread, so don't mix up the 2 pulleys. They're slightly different. You can get at the bottom one, or the one from the bottom as well. So there's the water pump bolts, 1, 2, 3. And I think we got to take the thermostat housing off. We're going to look at the new part. So this is what I'm putting on. It's a new water pump from Gates World Parts. Comes as an assembly, so you can see approximately how big this monstrous pump is and all the fasteners on there. There's a lot of fasteners to remove. So this is the thermostat housing, I believe, over here that we're going to have to take off. Yeah, this goes to the front of the truck. So we got to remove the thermostat housing and the upper rad hose. Let's do that now. Drain the cooling system. So it looks like we have to remove this upper engine brace because it goes over top of one of the fasteners on the thermostat housing down here. There's one here, and one behind this black plastic. So undo this fastener, these 2 12mm bolts, and then you can take this brace out that goes to the intake manifold. You should be able to anyways. There we go. And these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fasteners, looks like 14 mil. And hopefully this brace will come off of here. That'll give us a little bit more room to get at the upper bolts on the water pump. So there are 6 bolts that hold this bracket on, and a couple of them are a challenge to get out, but this one down here, which is like 6 inches long, won't come out because it hits the AC pipes. I'm trying to figure out how, if we could raise the engine about an inch, inch and a half, it would come out over top here, maybe. So let's look at supporting the bottom of this engine. If that comes out of the way, there'll be a lot more room. So there's the thermostat housing out. We're going to replace the thermostat while we have it here, which means taking apart the upper hose assembly. And there's a hose clamp down in here you have to release and get in there with a screwdriver and work this, the hose free. And there's an O-ring seal down here on this coolant pipe that we're going to have to replace that comes with the water pump. So we got a few more bolts on the water pump and it should be out. So I found it easy to pull it up from the back first. Pull that, turn it up clockwise and pull it out through the top. It's a little snug. You got to put the pulley back on to the wheel or onto the shaft, and don't forget to put the pulley on the new pump when you're putting it in. So we'll get the gasket off there, clean up the surfaces and start reassembly. The water pump's been leaking for a while and you can hear how rough it is. So there's the gasket surface all cleaned and the new gasket roughly installed. I put one stud at the very top here just to kind of hold the gasket in place because it doesn't have dowels. Surprised. Usually there's dowel pins on these, but I don't see any dowel pins. So nothing missing. I used Permatex spray gasket sealant on the gasket and we're going to start to reassemble the water pump now. So put some thread sealant on the longer bolts because they go into the cooling system. Permatex thread sealant. So there's the water pump reinstalled. Pulley back on. Put a little dab of Loctite on each one of these bolts because it's nearly impossible to get a torque wrench in there. So you have to tighten them by feel using a pry bar in between the bolts to keep the pulley from turning. We're going to reassemble this bottom idler pulley and the tensioner pulley and the idler pulley. I think he's got new ones. We're going to have a look at them. So because we have the thermostat housing off, I'm going to put a new thermostat in it. That's the new thermostat. Notice the little jiggle pin here? That's to let air bubbles out of the system, so make sure it's on the top of the thermostat housing. The old one had one in there as well. There it is. That one was on the outside. So we got a new thermostat in there. It calls for a 180, I believe. I don't recall the thermostat setting. I should look. So that's the thermostat part number that it calls for from Cooling Depot. So there's the new O-ring installed on the housing on the water pump and the new O-ring on the pipe. A little bit of dielectric grease on both, and we're ready to install a thermostat housing now. I noticed that the dowel or the stud came out of the old housing. Okay, looks we should have no problem putting that on. Well, there's that upper motor mount back in, motor mount bracket. Still have to put the serpentine belt on. In hindsight, I probably should have put it on before I put the thermostat housing and everything because it's all down below, but I think I can get it from underneath. I have to look at the belt routing because I took it off from the top here. Make sure when you're putting this bracket in that you put that one bolt in there in the bracket, because that's the only one you can't get in or out with the bracket on the engine. It has to come out with the engine bracket as an assembly. So this is the serpentine belt routing diagram. Okay, I think we're good to go. Well, there it is, back together and running again. There's a cooling system bleed nipple back here. If you loosen that off a couple turns while you're filling the cooling system, most of the air will purge out. And then if you slowly fill it while it's running at that point, it should be good. This has a rear heater, so it will take a bit of running to get the air out of the rear lines, but we didn't have them off, so we should be fairly close to full.